Hi, Ralph Preston here. I'm with William Lowe yet again, and we're going to do another roadmap segment tonight. And um, a few months ago, we did a survey, and we asked people what everyone would like to us to talk about. We covered most of almost all of the major topics, the ones that people told us were important to them. Except one. I made up the list, so I obviously hit on a bunch of things I knew everybody would want, and but we allowed people to write in. And number three on the list, and then the highest of all in terms of the write-in ones, was the stroke recovery kit. The top 10 things you need to know early in your recovery. So we thought we should cover that. And William and I both made up our list of top 10 things, and we quickly realized that we got 20 of them. A few of them are overlapping, but it could take like quite a number of shows to cover all these. So we decided to break it down a little bit and cover them as many as we can each week until we get through. And one of the ones that, what we're going to talk about tonight is one of the ones that appeared on both lists. So William had slightly different language for it, power of habits and routine, and I called it, setting up, the importance of setting up a home physical therapy recovery program once you get out of the rehab hospital. So that this is a fairly big subject, so we thought we would take that, and an important one. So we thought we would take that on tonight, and then over the next few weeks, we'll get to all these topics. Um, so, William, why don't you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on habits and routine? Make good habits, I assume.
Yeah, sure. So I think in recovery after stroke, one of the most important things to really consider, especially if you're in the early days of your recovery, is that it's really important to get into a really good routine of really training your brain every single day and really keeping yourself accountable for your recovery after stroke. Because if there's one thing which I've learned in my own recovery after stroke and also coaching stroke survivors in theirs is that the only one who's going to make results happen in their recovery is the person looking back at you in the mirror. And quite often, your results in recovery after stroke are determined with how you start your recovery. So I think that in recovery after stroke, it's really important, once you start your recovery to really get dialed into into what are the things you're going to do every single day, which are going to move the needle closer to your best possible recovery after your stroke. So one of the things I've learned speaking to a lot of stroke survivors, both online and in person, is that when they're in hospital receiving therapy, they tend to get the most results. But then quite often when they run out of insurance or when they're discharged from hospital, they find that their recovery sort of slows down, and it's a lot harder to get that momentum in that routine which they had when they were in the hospital. And that's usually when they notice that they were making the most improvement. And if we were to get a little bit geeky here, their recovery curve in the hospital is kind of like this, where it goes up quite rapidly. But when they get home, what they generally find is that their recovery curve tends to plateau off, or 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 they quickly get to a place where they're noticing that they're not seeing improvements as quickly as they used to. And the reason why this happens is because quite often they don't transfer some of the things which they learned in the hospital, or they don't transfer that. They're not able to replicate the same environment which they had when they were in the rehab hospital to when they're at home. And I think this is really important because, as Raf and I have discussed in previous segments, therapy is really all around you. And in order for your brain to actually provide itself incentive to actually want to recover and rewire what was lost, it has to be surrounded by a lot of opportunities to latch on to new things and new experiences in order to teach itself how to do the things or relearn the movements which it used to do before you actually had your stroke. So I think So I think when it comes to recovery, it's really important to set up a routine and set up a sort of a system, if you will, of daily habits and daily tasks which you would do in order to get the exact same results over a long period of time. So what we're looking at is exercises which are done consistently over a period of time so that you can eventually reach your goal of whether this be being able to open up your hand or being able to return to walking without the cane for the very first time. And I think that in the hospital, when you're recovering, it's actually quite easy because you've got someone there to keep you accountable. In other words, a therapist or a doctor comes to see you every day. But once your insurance runs out or once you get discharged from the hospital, you're going to be left alone at home, and there's no one coming to save you, and there's no one coming to tell you to recover. And in most cases, it's going to be up to you to actually be the change that you want to see in your recovery, and it's going to be up to yourself to take responsibility for what you're going to be doing every single day in order to actually make recovery happen for yourself. Whether this be, going outside for a walk every single day for a long period of time, just to make sure that you're applying some of the things that your brain might have learned from some of the exercises which were given to you from your home exercise program, which you got from the hospital, or I guess just thinking about ways you could modify some of the things which your brain has already learned in such a way that your brain is able to actually learn a lot more from what it already has recovered. So I think it's really important. And I think both Ralph and I have spoken about this in the past. I believe both of us did. Ralph did 10 hours of rehab when he came home, and I did 6 hours of rehab when I came home. I think that if you can sustain, if you can transfer some of the things or that momentum which you got from the hospital to when you get home, then it can really pay off dividends for your recovery after stroke. And I really think that's the key to recovery after stroke, especially in the early days, if you really want a head start in your recovery, because as we all know, the most recovery after stroke happens in that first year or that first 6 to 12 months after your stroke. So if you don't make the most out of that time, then it's going to be time lost. And it's going to be a lot harder to get your brain to recover what was lost later down the line, maybe past the 1 year mark. So before I pass it on to you, Ralph, I just want to end by saying that I think that, developing a system for success is really important in recovery after stroke, because you want to do daily actions which are going to move you towards your end goal, which is going to be something like returning to walking or being able to open up your hand for the very first time after stroke. And it won't happen overnight, but it's going to be something which you're going to have to chip out over weeks and over months and maybe over years in order to make things happen. So having said that, I just want to pass over to you, Ralph. I know that you had quite an extensive routine when you came home from the hospital, and you mentioned that you had done 10 hours of rehab in the early days of your recovery. Just wondering if you could share your thoughts on this topic of, making sure that you develop habits and, routines in your recovery after stroke.
Sure. One thing I think that contributes to how well it goes in the rehab hospital is that you mentioned accountability. Yeah, you know that you're going to report to your physical therapist. I did 2 a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. You know you're going to see them and can be accountable. But one thing is there's structure. They have a structure set up, and all you have to do is conform with it. When you go home, you have to set up your own structure. And I think that's a stumbling block for a lot of people, because I see a lot of people not really doing what maybe they should be doing when they go home from the hospital. It takes Sometimes people don't set up a home recovery program for 6 months or a year until they get frustrated, and then they're jump starting it late in the whole world of neuroplasticity. Like you said, neuroplasticity lasts a lifetime, but you do have more closer to your injury, insult, stroke. So you need to take advantage of that, and that's not a simple thing because I think you mentioned that you don't really move forward until you have some level of acceptance. So I hate to see people going through the whole cycle of acceptance and not doing much therapy because I feel like they're possibly burning neuroplasticity, burning daylight, as we say in the film and video business. Let's get the shot. We're burning daylight. I mean, you only have so much time. It's not true, but the curve for neuroplasticity does go down. I wasn't aware of this particularly because I didn't know much about stroke, and I only knew about me. And when I went home, maybe other people left, but I didn't know what happened to them after or anything. I was really concerned. I like structure. I like being in a rehab hospital. Everybody wanted to go home like they were going to magically be wheeled across the transom of their front door and stand up and return to their normal life. I didn't think that was going to happen. So everybody in the rehab hospital I was in wanted to go home, like because they thought that was going to magically make them better. I wanted to stay 3 more weeks, but I knew my insurance company wouldn't allow it, and my wife was driving quite a distance, and she would have continued to do that. It'd been hard on her, but mainly I couldn't do it. But I've been happy staying there, doing physical therapy, occupational therapy, pool therapy, hand and arm class. They had quite a good program. So I had 2 PTs, hand and arm class, and OTs, and pool therapy almost every day. So that's 5 hours out of the day. Keeps you from watching too much TV sitting in the bed, which I hated. Anyway, yeah, so I latched onto the structure in the rehab hospital because I liked structure, and I was also sitting there in a wheelchair, real concerned about my future. And I figured, kind of said to myself, man, I'm screwed unless I do something about this. So I jumped on it in the hospital. I tried to learn as much as I could because I knew I'd be going home. I mean, I knew I'd have outpatient physical therapy. I didn't know my outpatient physical therapist I wasn't going to think much of. But so I jumped on it, and I was being a kind of a maniac. I guess I lucked into staying with it. When I got home, I immediately said to myself, "Okay, how are we gonna do this?" And yes, I did do 10 hours a day. So I don't know. On day one or two, I came up with the idea of I would walk. I would do something for 50 minutes because that was like what PT was like. You went for 45 or 50 minutes and you went back to your room or do another session or you rested or whatever. So I just kind of used that model. And I said, okay, I got up at 7 and I worked till I did PT and lunch and tying my shoes. I got to do more and more PT as time went on because I got quicker at tying my shoes and taking a shower. Wasn't a half-hour proposition after a few months. But anyway, I worked on the hour. I would start something else. So every other hour, typically by 8, I was walking. So 8, 10, 12, I walked. 8 lunch, 2 and 4, maybe 6, I walked again. And then the odd numbers, it would depend on the day because I didn't always start at 8. I just went back and forth. The other hours when I wasn't walking, I was doing either hand stuff or arm and shoulder, trying to get my arm and shoulder back. So I kind of had like a little bit of a program on the 3 things I was working on: walking, hand, and shoulder, and I did them every day. That, of course, if I split between the hand and shoulder, that meant I was walking twice as much as I was doing hand and shoulder, but I did both of them about 2 or 3 times a day. In the beginning, you can't walk. I couldn't walk but 1 lap in the driveway. It'd take me like 5, 10 minutes to get out there, and I'd do 1 slow lap. I'd come back in. eventually I got to do more and more and more, and I did. And I stuck with that for about 15 months, and I just kind of, I didn't blow up or anything. I got sick of it. And one day I just said, okay, I'm going to go into maintenance mode, and I basically switched over to functional therapy, using my hand for everything I could, um, using the chores and responsibilities in life as therapy, washing dishes, cooking, working with my video camera because my left hand's affected, and you zoom and hold the camera with this one, but you do focusing and the exposure with your left hand. So even when I was working, I was doing occupational therapy. So, you know, this is a real important transition. Like most of the things in my early recovery, I just somehow lucked onto the right way of dealing with it. Maybe we should talk a little bit about setting up a home therapy program. I modeled mine off of the very little I knew to do from spending 3 weeks in the rehab hospital. I didn't know anything about physical therapy much. Well, I'd broken a finger and I'd done some pinky therapy, but I didn't know much about stroke or therapy and stuff. So I get home and I took the various sheets they gave me and the things that I remembered from the different classes or sessions, and I, somebody taught me corner push-ups. Somebody showed me how to do push-ups on a railing. So I had drawn circles with my left hand, so I got them out of the attic and started doing them again. So I just took the things that were around me and said, this is what I got to work with, and I built them into a program. And as I learned more and got better, I introduced other exercises, and I sometimes dropped exercises. I typically tend to just add them and keep adding stuff and resting less in between. So that was a long-winded answer to you tossing it to me. What kind of advice do we have for people about setting up a home therapy program? I know both of us feel that 45 minutes of therapy twice a week isn't enough. In fact, in one of these talks, we talked about how neither of us really counted it. It's not really therapy time, it's like learning time. If you're getting the most out of your physical therapist, they're showing you stuff. They're not having you walk down the hall for 40 and back for 45 minutes because you can do that at home. So I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this, William.
Yeah. So just to reiterate and just underline what Ralph said about, I guess, taking everything you learned from hospital and coming home. I think that's really important because by doing that, you're advocating for yourself as a stroke survivor, and especially because both Ralph and I, we both had our strokes at a time when not a lot was known about recovery after stroke. I know for myself, speaking for myself, I was incentivized because I didn't know what a stroke was. I didn't know how to recover from a stroke. There weren't a lot of role models back when I first had my stroke to really lean on, like right now. For those of you who are watching Roadmap, you're able to hear from us, from myself and Ralph, and we're able to share our notes on recovery. I didn't have any of that when I had my stroke, and so I was incentivized to create a home exercise program because I wanted to transfer what I was learning at the hospital to when I was at home, because that was the only real way to really understand how to actually tackle recovery after stroke, at least from my standpoint. I needed to know why so that I could create a system. And I think a home exercise program is best done in conjunction with physical therapy. The reason why I say this is because quite often with a lot of people, when they run out of insurance or when they're discharged from the hospital, there might be a period of maybe 6 weeks where they receive home therapy, where a therapist comes to see them at home. I think that the home therapy program is best developed with the physical therapist because when you're creating a home exercise program, basically the therapist who was seeing you at home, they would give you some exercises, and the hospital would have given you a home exercise program when you went home. I think that when you have a home exercise program, it should also consist not just of exercises, but also, or maybe sometime when you're video or taking video of yourself so that you can reference how much you're actually improving, and you can work together with the physical therapist who you're seeing to actually identify the places where you could maybe improve. So I would start the way I structured my home exercise program, and I didn't do as many hours as Ralph, 10 hours, but I did something similar around 6 or 8 hours, where my home exercise program was very much structured like the same routine I had in hospital, where we would generally wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we would just start exercise straight away. And then we would have a break at lunchtime, and then after lunch we would hit the upper body exercise, and that would be working on the shoulder or working on the hand. So the way I developed my home exercise program in my early days was that I would wake up at around 7 or 8 o'clock. I would quickly hit the shoulder or the arm exercises in bed, where I was lying down. I was kind of doing backstroke exercises or lifting up my shoulder in supine, as they refer to in OT school. And basically, this was basically to just get that head start and just wake me up for the day. And then after I did my upper body exercise, I would eat my breakfast, and once I was done with breakfast, I would go walk outside for about an hour, making sure I was applying everything I learned from the hospital to that walk, and making sure I was walking in hilly areas so that I could really challenge my brain to really strengthen up those muscles and incentivize it to actually want to recover. And after my walk, I would come back. I would have a nap. I would eat lunch, and then I would have a nap. And then once I woke up from my nap, I would go out for my afternoon walk, and then I would also do my shoulder and my arm exercises when I came back from my afternoon walk. So in a way, that's sort of how I structured my exercise program. What you will notice there is that I did things more than once. And the reason why I did things more than once is because because in the hospital, generally speaking, you would do things more than once anyway. I mean, you would do things once a day, because of the limited time which physical therapists would have with you. But at home, obviously, you have a lot more time to play with, and because there was a sense of urgency on my end to sort of get things handled, I wanted to make the most of the energy I had, especially in those times of the day when I was most awake, for example, in the morning, to really move the big rocks or do the most difficult exercises. And once I developed that structure for my home exercise program, I would also run it by the physical therapist, and they would double check it, and they would give me feedback on, I guess, how I did some of the exercises, because I would videotape everything I did. I would videotape the squats which I did at home, the walking which I did around the house, and then I would use the physical therapist as a way to tweak my home exercise program over time. And that's what I found really, really helped for myself. And I believe that for those folks who are watching this roadmap, that if you could just think about some of the things which I mentioned in the way I structured my home exercise program, as well as some of the things which Ralph mentioned, that maybe you could think about how you could apply some of the things which we've shared to how you would structure a home exercise program in your recovery after stroke. So that's pretty much how I structured my home exercise program. As you can see, I pretty much brought the hospital to my home so that I could continue to build on that momentum which I had in the hospital. Because I knew as a young 17-year-old, and I had my stroke when I was 17, that momentum was probably going to be lost after the hospital. I had 1 year to make things happen before I went back to university, and I tried to recapture the past. And that was generally when the most neuroplasticity would happen. So I had to set myself up for success for a long, big picture goal, which I had in mind in the future, which is why I've probably been repeating myself. is because it's all about that big picture goal and making sure that you have a daily routine which is contributing to that big goal of yours which you want to achieve, whether this being able to get more use out of your hand or being able to walk for the very first time after your stroke without the cane. So that's my take on how to develop a home exercise program. And Ralph, I'm sure you might have something to add. If you did have anything to add, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, you know, I didn't think about it as setting up a home exercise program. I realized after the fact that that's what I was doing. I just felt like, okay, the best way to get better is do more therapy. So I didn't really talk to them. I got maybe a couple sheets, and mostly what I did was I remembered a lot of the things that we were doing in therapy. And the other thing is here in the States, I think in Europe and Australia where you are, they keep you in the hospital longer, and they also send you to like rehab facilities for longer than we get here. The insurance companies here have certain metrics. When you can transfer, eat, and toilet yourself, you go home. I mean, that's it. It doesn't matter where you are in recovery. You meet the requirements, you go home. So, and you just had a stroke. So, the best, I realize this with us talking, the best thing you can do is just, try and structure something for yourself based on what you know at that point. And then here in the States, you typically get released and then they set up outpatient physical therapy if you can drive, or if they typically don't use a lot of in-home therapy unless the patient can't get to outpatient therapy or there's some reason. It typically takes a few weeks to get set up. So actually, by the time I was going to outpatient physical therapy, I'd gone from being able to walk one lap. The first week I had somebody walk me, and then they went home, and I didn't have anybody to walk me, so I had to walk on my own. So I went from that to being able to walk 5, 6, 7, 8 laps by the time I even got into physical therapy. So one of the things I've seen in the Facebook groups is people say, "Great, I got into physical therapy. I start 3 weeks from Friday, and I want to type in, well, that's 23 days from now. What are you going to do in the 23 days? You're going to sit around and wait to get into physical therapy?" I wouldn't, but a lot of people do. So, if we can leave you with anything tonight, it's, the importance of continuing what you were doing in the hospital or rehab hospital. And since you're not a trained physical therapist, you're just somebody who had a stroke, you kind of have to go with the knowledge that you gain from the therapy that you're exposed to and just continue that at home. I mean, there are such things. I mean, you could do something with really bad form and develop bad habits. But generally, if you stick with things that they give you at therapy, any movement's good. I mean, I stuck with basics like walking and corner push-ups and circles with my shoulder and squats and or knee bends. People call them both, or marching or high stepping. People call that two different things. If you stick with those kinds of things, you really can't get in too much trouble. And there's a world of stuff out there. I mean, you might not believe it, but I had a YouTube channel when I had my stroke because I'm a video professional. It didn't have any stroke videos on it. In fact, I could not find a stroke recovery video on the entire internet 14 and a half years ago. Not one. And now there's a world of resources out there. So I would say, when you get home, get moving and stay moving. All movement's good. More movement equals less depression. So it'll help you with the whole acceptance thing and getting over it, which is part of what you need to do in order to be motivated. I see a lot of people struggle with that part of it, and I know it's necessary. I went through it. I struggled with it. But as quick as you can, it's best to get over it and get some level of acceptance, at least enough level of acceptance that you can motivate yourself to recover at home. So that's my thoughts on it. You know, get moving, stay moving. Almost anything you do is good. If you're having trouble with walking and something's not right, I wouldn't try and I'd ask my PT what the correction is and not. William and I both believe in form over distance, because form's really important, much more important than speed. Speed comes with good form. You don't train for speed, you train for form, and quality and speed come with it. So get moving, stay moving, set up a home program, work with your physical therapist. Don't wait to get into outpatient to do something, because if you feel like doing it and you think you don't know what to do, you can always walk, do corner push-ups. I got a YouTube channel just with over 100 basic exercises. There's nothing complex about them, and I do record them all in my home because I want people to realize that you get better at home. You do not get better in a couple of PT sessions every week. Those are your lessons. That's not therapy. Those are your lessons. So, you know, do as much as you can. People say, well, you did 10 hours. What do you recommend doing? I don't think everybody can do what I did. So my answer to that is try and do a block in the morning and a block in the afternoon. Well, how long are those blocks? As long as you can do them. And, you know, as you get better, try and make them longer. So you know, it's not a cop-out answer, because you can't say, I can't sit here, neither can you, look at somebody and say what they're going to do. So it's up to you what you do, and you're the one who knows your limits and knows what you're dealing with your stroke and your personality and everything. So get moving, stay moving. Be my advice. Anything else, William, or should we close this out?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add on to what Ralph said
Sure.
about get moving. Yeah, I just think it's really important to jump on recovery as it happens. So let's say if your goal is to improve your walking, and let's say if you can walk 10 yards, 10 yards after you left the hospital, we're walking that 10 yards. And as you get better, maybe you can increase it to 20 yards, to 30 yards. I mean, I was fortunate to be able to walk after my stroke with the help of a cane in about just over 1 month. And I start off being able to walk maybe 5 to 7 yards. But after I did a couple of laps of the hospital, when I go home, that 8 yards, that turned into 30 yards. And then it eventually turned into 40 yards. And my home exercise program came from my success and the rhythm and the momentum which I developed when I was working on those 10 yards. And I just think, just to reiterate what Ralph said again, you've got to get moving, and you've got to just apply what you've learned from the hospital. And just do it every single day, and the success will come. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen once you apply your home exercise program every single day over a long period of time.
Well, and the way to introduce more stuff is to work on becoming your own physical therapist, which you can start once you get into physical therapy and set up a program. So yeah, so the last thing I would say would be try and keep the momentum. You get certain momentum because of the structure and the accountability in the hospital, and you learn certain things. You learn enough, you learn everything that they're teaching you to work on at that point, so you can take all that home with you. And then as you get better and as you learn and you're exposed to physical therapists and the internet, searching YouTube, you can introduce other things as you learn more. So keep the momentum going.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Ralph.